Unit 1, 8000 BCE to 600 BCE. Nothing happened.
Unit 2, 600 BCE to 600 CE. The Americas were agricultural with some domesticated animals. Even though they were isolated, they displayed impressive achievements like calendars and a hieroglyphic alphabet. In Central America, an Indian group called the Olmecs developed and spread an early form of civilization from about 800 to 400 BCE. Their successors built the first great city, Tenochtitlan, but suffered from regional wars. From its base, a fuller civilization of the Mayas developed from 400 CE onward. A similar civilization arose in the Andes region that later led to the civilization of the Inca. These two centers developed in total isolation.
Olmec culture explored artistic forms in precious stones like jade, and they blended human images with those of animals. Their successors developed a hieroglyphic alphabet and turned Tenochtitlan into a center of worship. The ancestors of the Incas built elaborate pyramid-shaped religious monuments. Altogether, the culture of American Indians were ahead of those in Europe. During Unit 2 of the Americas, there were not many changes and continuities. A couple key changes were that they became more advanced in agriculture, science, and writing, plus they were more elaborate and civilized. These changes occurred as a result of better agriculture, which led to settling down, making advancements, and changing from nomadic ways. A key continuity would be that they remained agriculturally based.
Because people began to settle down and diverge from nomadic ways in the Americas, this led to the development of the Aztec and Inca civilizations.
Unit 3, 600 CE to 1450. With the rise of new empires, they developed a distinct culture, a growing economy, and new political structures. The two most important American empires during this time were the Aztecs and the Incas. The Aztec government controlled the use and distributions of goods collected from conquered people. Their empire was split into city-states that were ruled by local rulers called caracas who were chosen by nobility. In the Incas, they inherited the idea of split inheritance, which helped them develop a state bureaucracy where all nobles played a role. Political instability appeared due to eventual European conquest, and fear to maintain political control led to religion conviction.
The Aztecs worshipped traditional gods of Mesoamerica, which led to the sacrifice of many Aztecs.
Aztec women could inherit property but were still subordinate to men. Education expanded the Meso concepts and institutions of government. Their key technology consisted of adobe brick houses, crisscross canals, and chinampas that irrigated crops. Inca women worked in fields, houses, and wove cloth, while women taken from the conquered land worked as concubines and servants. The Incans created the quipu, a system of knotted strings used to keep track of finances and censuses. Incas flourished in land crafts like their extensive road systems and architecture.
Economically, they started to make many connections with the outside world. In 1434, they created an alliance with two other city-states that controlled the Central Plateau. Tenochtitlan and the Aztecs dominated their allies and controlled most of the tributes and land taken. Inca trade was not as important to them as it was to the Meso. They raised roads connected to the mainland, and most production was made by peasants. The greatest change for the Americas in this unit were the rise of the Aztec and Inca empires. After the fall of the Toltec, the Aztec rose and settled in Tenochtitlan. They dominated and claimed tribute and lands.
Inca began to expand after control of Cusco,
They adopted the idea of split inheritance,
motivating future rulers to fight for more land to gain more wealth. They spread the Quechua language, practiced mita or labor terms that were essential to control, and believed in parallel descent, where nobility passed in males and females.
By 1450 CE, the Incas and Aztecs had risen and flourished. However, European arrival to the Americas will soon lead to the fall of these empires and the introduction to Western culture. Unit 4, 1450 to 1750.
The Americas were colonized and taken over by Western nations while drawn into the global network. The Americas were governed by the ruling homeland overseas. In 1519, Hernan Cortez fought against Moctezuma II, the last independent Aztec ruler. Hernan Cortez went inland in 1521, burning his ships and supplies so his men were forced to follow him. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro led the conquest of the Incas. In the 16th century was the Council of Indies in the Spanish Empire, consisting of 4 viceroyalties, New Spain and Peru.
Colonial governments included viceroyalties, major divisions of Spanish New World colonies headed by direct representatives of the king with military, legislative, judicial powers. One was based in Lima, the other in Mexico City. Audiencia, royal courts of appeals established in Spanish New World colonies, staffed by professional magistrates who made and applied laws.
The Spain's successor, a French Bourbon, created reforms for the Americas which led to tension, revolts, and the ethnic divisions, making it hard to unify the locals.
Socially, polytheism plays a large role before the Euros spread the ideas of monotheism. The status of rank within the Americas was the same for women, having no power and not being equal to men. However, a new social pyramid was established.
The conquest and settlement of Latin America created the conditions for the formation of a multi-ethnic society. The children of Europeans and Native Americans were called mestizos, and the children of Europeans and black slaves were called mulattoes. At the top of the new social pyramid, there were the peninsulares, or the Spaniards who were actually born in Spain. Underneath them were the criollas, who were the Spaniards born in the New World. Next were the mestizos and the mulattoes, the mixed, and finally at the bottom were the Native Americans and black slaves.
Education was established for high-class persons such as sons of local rulers to ensure the loyalties of the rulers. They had to send their oldest son to be educated within the capital. If the rulers attempted to ruin their connections, the son would be executed.
Economically, the Americas imported many slaves in 1502 by the Atlantic slave trade.
Europeans took many Africans and sent them to America as slaves to work on their colonies.
Brazil got most of the slaves because they had the most sugar plantations and later turned into mining for gold and silver.
The reasons for slaves from Africa was because the Europeans brought diseases that killed off 90% of the Native Americans. Most of the diseases were brought through the Columbian Exchange. Following the Spanish establishment of colonies, Europe and Africa came to the New World in the Columbian Exchange. From Europe, the Americas got diseases, livestock, and grains. The diseases of Eurasia and Africa had a greater impact on America than American diseases had on the Old World. However, simple crops like corn and potatoes were very popular and spread quickly. Please note, Asia was not a part of this exchange. In the exchange of food and stimulants, America contributed the most. However, from Africa, they brought to America coffee beans and bananas.
The key changes that occurred was that the Americas were colonized and founded, the triangular trade, the Columbian Exchange, and the Atlantic trade was established.
And the major population dropped due to the diseases brought over during the Columbian Exchange.
The key continuities, however, was that the Americas continued to be explored. There was a lot of discrimination that occurred. The Americas were still agricultural, and they had a dependent economy. In the end, America was colonized and founded because of the 3 G's: God, glory, and gold. Because colonization happened in the Americas, this region will soon experience rebellion for independence.
Unit 5 Americas, 1750 to 1900. The Americas were having revolutions to gain their independence from European countries. The countries experienced successful revolutions and, as a result, had political, social, and economic change. After independence, many Latin American countries had to deal with political fragmentation. In the mid-18th century, British colonists in America felt threatened by France's colonial settlements on the continent. In 1756, the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, started. The French fought alongside Native American tribes against the British. In 1763, the British prevailed over the French. The British were upset with the cost of the war. Taxes were put on sugar, stamps, and tea. American colonists thought these laws were economically unfair because they were not represented in English Parliament when these laws were passed.
The angry colonists snuck onto British ships and dumped the tea into Bar Harbor to protest the Tea Act.
No taxation without representation! No taxation without representation!
On April 1775, British troops battled with the rebellious colonists in Lexington and conquered. The American Revolution began. The European colonies in Latin America were inspired by the success of the American and French Revolution. Europe was in chaos because of the rise and fall of Napoleon, and this distracted European powers from their American holdings. The first successful Latin American revolt took place in Haiti. Toussaint Louverture overthrew the French in the first successful slave riot, and Haiti gained their independence in 1804.
As a result of Enlightenment ideas, inspiration from other revolutions, and weakened colonizers due to war, in the American colonies, many discontent Criollas led revolts against the Peninsulares.
Simon Bolivar was a leader of the revolutions in Gran Colombia in 1817 to 1822. We also have José de San Martín, who led movements in Argentina, which led to independence in 1816. Pedro I granted Brazil's independence after his father John VI returned back to Portugal to rule. Miguel Hidalgo started the revolts against Spanish in Mexico with the Cry of Dolores. These countries experienced political fragmentation after they booted the Europeans out. To ensure Europe wouldn't recolonize the Americas, the Monroe Doctrine was created. After the U.S. Civil War, the U.S. became heavily involved in Latin America. In the Spanish-American War in 1898, the U.S. beat Spain and gained control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and bought the Philippines. The Catholic Church remained powerful in Latin America. Romanticism in the 1830s pumped up national indigenous culture. Women were still patriarchal. Peninsulares were kicked out, and the Creoles were put on top of the social pyramid. Improvements were made for education. Women were now being taught, and some education became compulsory. Many reforms for the lower class were made. One of the biggest ones was the abolishment of slavery. The U.S. experienced change in their economy with the Industrial Revolution. Latin America's economy boomed in the 1880s, but they were still pretty rural and dependent on the world economy. The U.S. built the Panama Canal and finished in 1914. Latin America's economy was similar to Africa's and Asia's. Some key changes to remember were the revolutions, gaining of independence, the abolishment of slavery, and the Industrial Revolution. Key continuities were: women were still patriarchal, social structures were still the same, except Europeans were kicked out, and for Latin America, they were still dependent on Europe economically.
The United States will soon rise in power as a result of the Industrial Revolution, and the newly independent colonies will face political fragmentation and struggle in deciding on a new government while world interactions continue to grow.
Please bring honor to us.